lot of you plebs like skins, and not only at esports pools can you play fantasy esports and win skins, but they right now have a pool set up just for me, an exclusive launch pool for their sponsorship with me, where you can play fantasy CSGO surrounding the PGL EU Minor, which will be coming up in a few days. And you can pick the players you think will perform there. I'll be picking them myself, and the winner gets a bunch of different skins. Check out the link below if you want to go and play that. Now, the player Ropz from mousesports is someone who has only just played his first 2 LANs for mouse. His fame came from being an exceptional rising talent in FPL, where he was playing against some of the best players in the world, pro-level players. His first LAN was DreamHack Tours, not that long ago. His team did well. They made top 4. He personally did not do very well. Now, it would have been very easy right at that point alone for people to already call him out really strongly. Like, you were so good at FPL, you were so good online, you were so good in EPL online initially with mouse. Where were the performances on LAN? What happened here? Is this guy a choker? Is he just overrated? Obviously, people a while ago suspected maybe even cheated. There was a joke about he always checks his second monitor. People thought he was maybe wall hacking or using some kind of ghosting, whatever it might be. Then he went to a second LAN, the one that was last week. It was EPL Finals. His team did well again. His team got out of groups. They managed to play second in their group. They unfortunately had to play one of the best teams in the world, SK Gaming, so they didn't get very far. His performance improved a bit, but even so, not at the level of the FPL performances, but, improved a bit coming along. Now, that alone shows you that you've already got to give people, for the new lineups, I always say like 3 LANs, you've got to give them a chance to test it out. But for new players in teams, you've got to give them a couple of LANs anyway. But actually, I go even further than that, and I'm actually going a lot easier on Ropz than almost any other player in the scene. Because most players who would be in seemingly his position now, in a team that's like top 10, top 15, around that kind of scale in the world. They've had some good performances online. They're qualifying for LANs. They've got other good players in the team, not necessarily world-class players necessarily. Other people who would be in his position like that have all these advantages and all these elements of experience that Ropz doesn't have. And so as a result, he does get a pass. He does get a get out of jail free card. He does get a remission that's specific to him for right now. Because think about how most players get to that position. Okay, they climb up through the competitive ladder. I don't mean the ladder in FPL sense. I mean they play in other teams. They play in tier 3 teams, and then they play in tier 2 teams, and they move up as they prove their worth and as they prove their role and as they have results individually and team-wise on LAN. They play with older veterans who are falling down the scene, but still have in wisdom they can impart and still play the game a certain way that you can pick things up off them and you can team play off them, and they can give you interesting pieces of information about how star players they played with work, much as in traditional sports. They learn the game from their teams as well. Their team leader gives them information. They get to go to smaller LANs. When no one knows you yet, the world isn't watching, you have a chance to get over your nerves, to prove yourself, to get some consistency, to get comfortable in the environment. And these small LANs are much smaller than DreamHack Tours. DreamHack Tours wasn't a tier 1 event by any means. But even that tournament and the teams that are at it are bigger than the kind of LANs we're talking about that these players test their mettle at, as it were. Or, even if a tournament that was one of your first big LANs was a DreamHack Tours size tournament, you'd at least be on the worst team there, or on one of the worst teams. You'd be on a Tricked, or one of the lesser teams in that particular response, and thus, less expectations. Your team is worse, you also won't be going further in a tournament, and contrasted to your team, you won't, in a relative sense, look as bad, whereas, yes, Ropz didn't look very good, contrasted against mousesports, that did pretty well at DreamHack Tours, actually, and a lot of the players were, specifically Oscar, really going off, Then you've got to consider that other players at this level, nearly all play with their countrymen or people from the same culture as them. They, as a result, not only feel more comfortable and understand the culture of the team and how to work with people and how to communicate, but there's also the fact that they learn the national metagame, the national style of play. Think of like NA teams, the French, Sweden, Denmark, Germany even. These teams all have a national way of playing, of structuring their teams. Their in-game leaders have similar ways of thinking about the game. They play off each other in a certain way. They communicate in a certain way. Certain things are acceptable in terms of practice and how you play and what kind of attitude you can have, what kind of personality you can express, how much autonomy you get. All these things are there, and they're all mired. They're all set. They're all down in the mud of the history of the game and how all these teams have played in the past and what the status quo is. Ropz doesn't have that, and in fact mousesports as a team doesn't have that. It's such a multinational team. Then you've got to consider that players who play on the lower levels, sometimes they find a player who they work well with, a teammate, and they learn off him, or they rise through ranks together, or they stick together. So there's always that core element, or a couple of players who play well off each other. And as a result, you're also able to get into other teams when that guy recommends you later on. And finally, players who get to the level Ropz are now already have their role and their identity set in terms of what they know they can do, what they want to do, and what they're good at, and then what everyone else understands about them in that sense. They're defined by they come to a top 10, top 15 team. Now let's look at Ropz in contrast to that. So DreamHack Tours was his first big LAN. And at a scale, as I said, very few other players have ever had to go to and ever had to live up to as well. Because remember, the success of Mouz online in EPL when he first joined the team meant that he was in this unique position where people expected him to be good already. I mean, he'd already had some good online games. Then his success individually in FPL and against amazing players put him again in a very unique position where at his first LAN, people expected him to play like a star, to come out the gates playing fantastically, yes, sometimes against lesser teams, and be incredible. Meanwhile, you go and think of some of the guys who've become very good in the last few years. Think of how long and how many LANs and how many teams they got to have him where they weren't even that good. They were like, okay, they sometimes showed potential, they were inconsistent, or they just showed an average that was much lower than what the people thought their potential and much lower than where they are now. Like, think about when Kirby was playing in Dignitas 2 years ago when he was playing with Pimp and AZ as his stars. He could just chill. He was like the third guy. He didn't even have to do much. He would have games that were very underwhelming. The rest of them would play really well. He'd just do well in one group stage game or online and then not that well offline. He was given a long time till he developed the next year into a star player, and now, obviously, good enough to become someone who could take over the final of the major. Elige was sat there behind Nitro, and thanks to the fact that Nitro also was an unproven player, he was just chilling while Nitro was figuring it out, becoming a good player. He was still a player who didn't figure out his own role and didn't have the same assertive, decisive nature to his personality, and was lost in the mix of Adren and all those other players that were from the last era of Liquid, going back into like the Denial, the Elevate type era of where some of those players came from. He had a long time, over a year, before he had to really develop into a good player. Likewise, his teammate Nitro. This is a guy where we knew he had talent and he'd shown it in iBuyPower and he'd shown it in some of these lesser teams. But then you get him over into Team Liquid and you get like a solid 6-9 months before he started to really show that potential online against Europeans, not just online against North Americans. Obviously, a lot of more Danish players. Config, he was chilling when Kirby was the solo carrier Dignitas. Magic was over playing in SK Gaming and he was a mad onliner. He had like 2 offline maps that were ever good and the rest was just balling out of control online and then coming to LAN doing nothing. His own teammate Freeze publicly criticised him and basically said that he was kind of just like an onliner, like he wasn't playing at that level offline. You got to look at some of the CIS players. Flamey. We knew he had incredible talent early on, and he got picked up to Na'Vi, but Guardian was hard carrying Na'Vi to major finals while Flamey was still figuring out, like, how do I even work with this team? Like, I'm much younger than the rest of them. How do I communicate? How do I actually get into the system they're playing and understand this complex tactical system and where I'm supposed to be? And eventually, yes, he became very, very good, like a year later, 9 months later, but he only had brief glimpses of that earlier on. Even on a lower level, someone like Mo, who was playing in the Hellraisers team that was a very confused team of old vets, and then got into Gambit, and still himself to some degree hasn't fully developed into what he could be. He still seems a bit lost in the mix when he gets to the tier 1 play versus the other good AWPers. All these players get a pass in their own way, or they just don't have the same expectations on them for us to demand greatness from them immediately, and they get time to work it out, to figure it out. They're not all just going to hit the ground running and be incredible like someone like Element or Real was back in the day of 1.6, who were prodigies, who were genius level players who almost were just made to play the game, it felt like. Then you got to consider Ropz is not only just playing at a top level, he's playing with an international team from day one. And not only like an international team as in like, it's not like he's like Guardian, who's Slovakian and goes and joins a team at CIS. So at least they have the culture and the shared heritage and he just learns their aspects and integrates himself. The entire Mouz team has to integrate. They've got someone from Spain, from Czech Republic, they've got German player, they've got obviously Chris J from Netherlands, and now they've got Ropz from Estonia. They've got totally different nationalities. Some of those nationalities share no cultural heritage whatsoever. And they're all trying to work together and figure it all out. And Ropz is not only having to learn one person's culture and how to work with them and integrate with them and communicate with them and how they're going to play. He's having to learn all these players for all his team. What a tough task to be a brand new player coming in doing that. Then you've got to consider that not only is he playing with an international team at a top level, going to big lands from the step one, but he doesn't even have a history of playing in teams before. He doesn't have a history of playing under leaders before. He doesn't have a history of playing with veterans before. In this team he's in now, he only really has two veterans. He has Oscar, who wasn't at an elite level but played a long time, and he has Chris J, who played a long time but at a much lower level and has played now a bit at the top level. He doesn't have a whole lot of players to learn from and who can teach him what to do, and he hasn't worked with players over the years to get to this point. He also doesn't even have a real in-game leader in mousesports. That's something they're still really juggling at the moment and trying to figure out, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to play, and they've got a good sense at the moment, but there's no tactical genius. There's no guy who knows everyone's role and can read the game in that sense. So who is there to help Ropz find his role and identify what he's going to do? Then you've got to add in the final aspect that, like as I said, because you play a lot of lower lands, even very good players get to work out their nerves and become more comfortable and learn how you set up and how you peak in a day and when to eat and what to do and how much smart time to spend with the team to get the good culture and the good harmony going and how much time to spend it privately so that you decompress, you're not stressed out as much. There's a lot of variables going on here that Ropz has to learn the ropes, as it were, very, very quickly. And as a result, I'm willing to give him a bit more time. And I think you've already seen from one land to the next, he has started to accustom himself some more. And for someone like him, beyond the 3 lands and the few months that you normally give the other players, I think you've got to give this guy 6 months, because we don't even know at the end whether this will be the final team he's on or whether this team will look like this or whether they'll bring in different players to work with him. He's clearly someone who has some talent, but he's in a very difficult, very harsh... His learning curve is incredibly steep because he's starting so high up on the ranks and with so many expectations on him. So I just want to see where he's going to go. And I'm willing to give it a little more room to breathe before we judge too harshly on this young man.
Hey guys, it's Thorin, also known as 944. Don't forget Thorin's YouTube channel.
Hey guys, this is Stewie from Cloud9.